Good day everyone, this is Group 4 and we are about to discuss our topic, charging for civil engineering services. Hello everyone, I am Joshua Escolano and I will introduce to you the key topics for our presentation about charging for civil engineering services. So there are several methods by which calculation of civil engineering services can be carried out in construction. It is possible to employ various charging approach at different phases of the engineering services. The application of each method or combination of methods is dependent on its nature, scope, and complexity of the required engineering services. So in this video presentation, these charging of civil engineering services are to be discussed. Before we move on to the methods of charging of civil engineering services, I will first identify the factors affecting its calculation. So, there are various factors that control the cost of engineering services required for a specific project. So, these are the following. First, the conditions at project site, degree of danger that may be encountered and exposure possibility. Third, system of project delivery, namely design, build, or design, build, operate, maintain. Next, type of developer or contractor or client owner. The owner's skill and experience in similar projects and the process of decision making. Submittal and review numbers required by the owner and regulatory commissions. The number of meetings held for communities based on the owner requirements. Types of schedule, namely conventional, delayed or accelerated. Project complexity and number of involved specialties and subcontractors. Finally, other contract restrictions. The aforementioned factors are crucial to how much a civil engineer is charged for a specific project. So, now as we identify the factors controlling the charges for civil engineering services, let us now tackle the methods for charging of civil engineering services. So, there are a total of 5 different methods. First method is salary cost times multiplier plus direct non-salary expense, which will be discussed by Jonalyn Favor. Second is all about hourly billing rate and per diem to be reported by Marlon Estrellado. Another topic is cost plus fixed fee and fixed price, which will be elaborated by Estares. Next is the percentage of construction cost, and a discussant will be Janel Frias. And the last method is the schedule of minimum basic fee to be tackled by Dinalyn Flores.
My topic is about salary cost times multiplier plus direct non-salary expense. Compensation on the basis of the salary cost times an agreed multiplier is a frequently used method of determining charges for engineering services. So sa madaling sabi, ang salary cost times an agreed multiplier ang madalas na ginagamit upang matukoy kung magkano ang tamang halaga ng serbisyo ng isang engineer. With this method, charges for engineering services are based mainly on direct salary. Pag sinabing direct salary, ito ay tungkol sa bayad na kinakukuha ng isang empleyado bilang sahod sa kanyang serbisyo. It is therefore advisable that the civil engineer reach an agreement with the client on salary ranges for each classification of service applicable as well as on the time period over which they can be guaranteed. Ito ay inirekomenda upang maiwasan ang anumang hindi pagkakaunawan sa pagitan ng kliyente at engineer pagdating ng panahon. Salary cost times multiplier method may be utilized as either a multiplier times salary cost, 2 multiplier version, or a multiplier times direct salary cost, single multiplier version. Moving on, Salary cost is defined as direct salaries plus employee benefits and includes salaries for partners or principal and for technical, professional, administrative, and clerical staff directly chargeable to the project, sick leave, vacation, holiday and incentive pay, unemployment and other payroll taxes, and the contributions for social security workers, compensation, insurance, retirement, medical, and other group of benefits. So, ang salary cost ay tungkol sa kabuoang sahod na natatanggap ng isang employee kasama na ang iba't ibang benefits, gayon din nakaltas na ang mga taxes na binabayaran ng isang employee tulad ng sa social security, insurance, retirement, medical, at iba pa. Next is multiplier, which is applied to salary cost. It is a factor that compensates the civil engineer for overhead, plus a reasonable margin for contingencies, interest, or invested capital readiness to serve the profit. Ito ay ang ina-apply sa salary cost dahilan upang may matanggap na halaga ang isang civil engineer kung sakaling ito ay mangangailangan ng pera dahil sa hindi inaasang pangyayari tulad ng accidents, injuries. The size of the multiplier will vary with type of service, nature, and experience of the civil engineering firm and geographic area in which its office is located. So, the average multiplier should be between 2.5 and 3 times the average salary cost. Ito ay magbabago lamang depende sa serbisyong kakailanganin. Ito ay tataas kung kinakailangan nito ng ekspertong rekomendasyon galing sa malawak na kaalaman at experience. Next is the direct non-salary expenses. Ito naman ay tungkol sa mga gastusin na may kinalaman sa trabaho mo na kung saan may babalik sa iyo sa pamamagitan ng reimbursement. Usually incurred in engineering engagements may include the following. First, living and traveling expenses of principals and employees when away from the home office on business connected with the project. Second, identifiable communications expenses such as long-distance telephone, telegraph, shipping charges, and special postage charges for other than general correspondence. Third, expenses for services and equipment directly applicable to the project as such for specialized technical equipment, special legal and accounting services, special computer rental and programming services, computer runtime and file storage, CAD charges, sub-consultants and subcontractors, commercial printing and binding and similar services that are not applicable for inclusion in general overhead. Fourth, identifiable drafting supplies, stenographic supplies and reproduction work such as blueprinting, photocopy, and printing charged to the client's project as distinguished from such supplies and expenses applicable to several projects. Lastly is the expenses for unusual insurance and specialized health and safety programs and for special clothing for projects with extraordinary risk such as toxic and hazardous waste conditions. Furthermore, civil engineers' overhead comprises major portion of the compensation generated by the multiplier on salary cost, includes the following indirect costs. Provisions for office expense, light, heat, telephone, depression, rental furniture, rent, drafting equipment and engineering instruments, transportation, expenses, and office and drafting supplies not identifiable to a specific project. Taxes and insurance other than those included as salary cost, library and periodical expenses and other costs of keeping abreast of advances in engineering such as attendance at technical and professional meetings and continuing education courses. Then, executive, administrative, accounting, legal, stenographic, and clerical salaries and expenses other than identifiable salaries included in salary cost and expenses, plus salaries or imputed salaries of partners and principals to the extent that they perform general, executive, and administrative services are distinguished from technical or advisory services directly applicable to particular objects. These service and expenses essential to the conduct of the business include preliminary arrangement for new projects or assignments and interest on borrowed capital. Business development expenses including salaries of principals and employees so engaged. provision for loss of productive time of technical employee between assignments and for time of principals and employees on public service assignments, cost of acquiring and maintaining computers, development of software, and training staff but not billed as a direct cost. Lastly is about accounting records. So the civil engineer who performs services under a salary cost times multiplier agreement or other cost-based agreement must provide the accounting necessary to segregate and record the appropriate expenditures adequately. Detailed hourly time record must be maintained for principals, engineers, and other employees who devote time to the project. Applicable payroll records together with receipt or other documents to substantiate chargeable expense must be available for inspection audit by the client if required by contract.
Another two methods are hourly billing rates and per diem. The hourly billing rate, it is very similar to the salary cost times multiplier method in that the hourly billing rate includes all direct personal expenses, overhead, and profit. Direct non-salary expenses are a separate item for reimbursement, usually with a service charge. The term per diem normally refers to an 8-hour day. The per diem charge should be based on the complexity, risk, and importance of the services and on the civil engineer's professional standing, expertise, and breadth of experience. The civil engineer is also reimbursed for travel and subsistence cost and for other out-of-pocket expenses incurred when away from the home office.
The next topics are cost plus fixed fee and fixed price.
First is the cost plus fixed fee. Under this agreement, the civil engineer is reimbursed for the actual cost of all services and supplies related to the project, including salary cost, overhead, direct non-salary expenses, and fixed fee, an amount to compensate the civil engineer for contingencies, interest on invested capital, readiness to serve, and profit. The cost plus fixed fee basis requires that the client and the civil engineer define and agree upon the scope of services the civil engineer to perform. Such definition of the scope of service is essential to enable the civil engineer to estimate cost and propose an equitable fixed fee amount. This must be incorporated into the client-engineer agreement. The cost plus fixed fee method can also be used when the civil engineer is required to start providing service before the detailed scope of services can be determined. In such cases, the following considerations apply. First, the general scale and intent of the project should be fairly well defined, even if the full scope is indeterminate. For example, the number, size, and character of buildings or other facilities. Second, the types of service to be performed by the civil engineer should be agreed upon and fully set forth. The agreement should also provide for appropriate adjustments in the fixed fee. In the event that the physical scope of the project, time of completion, or level of effort and services required are materially changed over those contemplated during the negotiations. The fixed fee amount varies with the complexity and the scope of the engineering services required. It is frequently calculated as a percentage of the salary cost, overhead, and direct non-salary expenses. Agreements for cost-based method should provide the reimbursement of all costs to be incurred directly or indirectly in connection with the project. The list of reimbursable items should be complete and detailed as possible. One advantage of the cost plus fixed fee method is that it eliminates any suspicion that the costs have been allowed to grow in order to increase the civil engineer's fee, which by definition is a fixed amount. Because the entire fixed fee is due to the civil engineer, whether or not the estimated project costs have been reached, the civil engineer has an incentive to complete the service promptly. Next is the fixed price. The fixed price method of compensation is frequently used for investigations and studies and for basic services and design type projects where the scope and complexity of the assignment are clearly and fully defined. The fixed price amount can be calculated as the sum total of estimated engineering costs for the salaries, overhead and non-salary expenses, an allowance for contingency interest, and invested capital, readiness to serve, and a reasonable amount for profit. A fixed price agreement should contain a clearly stated time period during which the services will be performed and a provision for adjustment of compensation if the project is delayed for reasons beyond the civil engineer's control. Partial payments should be made to the civil engineer at stated intervals, usually once a month, during the performance of the services. These payments are usually based on the civil engineer's statement of percent completion to date.
Percentage of construction cost. Construction cost is defined as the estimated total cost of constructing the facility. It includes the expenses on materials, supplies, tools, equipment, labor, and transportation, all covered on the entire construction of the project. Basis of percentage validity. The validity of percentage of construction costs falls in 4 categories. First, feasibility studies, 3%. Second, detailed engineering design, 6%. Third, detailed architectural and engineering design, 8%. And lastly, construction supervision, 10%. The construction cost is also used to determine the compensation on civil engineer. Schedule of minimum basic fees. Number 1. When doing work on foreign assisted projects or in projects where international consultants participate, the civil engineer performing similar or equivalent work should accept compensation that approximates the international standard rates according to Section 6.11 of the NEDA guidelines. For example, let's say the international standard rates is 100,000 pesos per month, and the approximation of 100,000 pesos is, let's say, 99,500. The working civil engineer should also receive a 99,500 pesos. Number 2. Civil engineers regularly employed in private sector shall have a minimum compensation corresponding to 10% more than the minimum wage prevailing in the region as the basic monthly salary. So for example, here in Sorsogon, the monthly salary of a civil engineer is 30,000 pesos. And the 10% of 30,000 pesos is 3,000. So now, as a civil engineer working on a private sector, I will receive 33,000 monthly income. Next, civil engineers employed in the government sector shall have a minimum basic monthly salary corresponding to appropriate entry positions provided by the Civil Service Commission. Every engineer holds different titles, and it all depends on the accomplishments or promotions they have in their work. So let's say, for example, a chief engineer and a project engineer. A chief engineer holds a higher title over a project engineer. So when it comes to their salary, the chief engineer will receive a bigger or higher income over than the project engineer. Number 3. A civil engineer employed in the private sector who signs and seals the civil service plans, specifications, and other related documents of certain project for and in behalf of his employers shall be compensated with a minimum of 10% of the professional fee for the project over and above the basic monthly salary. So let's say, for example, the professional fee is 50,000 pesos. And the civil engineer who signs and seals the documents and responsible for the legalities will also receive 50,000 pesos since his name was put on it and he's responsible for anything that will happen next.
Good day everyone, my name is Dinalyn Flores, your reporter for this topic. So the topic that I'm going to discuss is all about the schedule of minimum basic fee. So for this topic, we have two parts. For part A, the minimum compensation for civil engineer as a prime professional. For part B, minimum compensation for civil engineer as not a prime professional. Letter C is the minimum compensation for civil engineer for rendering the following services, where 1 is the value engineering and 2 expert witness. And for last topic, the minimum compensation for civil engineer as rendering academic services. So for our first part, we're gonna discuss the minimum compensation for civil engineer as a prime professional. So, yung una po nating i-discuss is yung part A or the minimum compensation for civil engineer as a prime professional. Ano ito? So, when the civil engineer assumes overall coordination including architectural and other engineering services, the engineer is a prime professional. Sa madaling salita, lahat po ng trabaho ay mapupunta kay civil engineer. Siya na po yung bahala na makipag-coordinate sa ibang aspect po ng project. For example po, sa architectural, sa electrical, sa plumbing, sa ventilation, etc. po na may kinalaman sa project. Siya na po yung makikipag-coordinate doon. So, for this part, we have two groups. For group 1, simple structures such as loft, warehouse, garage, sheds, market buildings, and comparable projects of 1 but not more than 2 stories. Para naman po makompute kung magkano po yung minimum basic fee, meron po tayong sinusundan na formula. So, babasahin ko po. Project construction cost and their minimum basic fees. 10 million and less, 6% yung makukuhang minimum basic fees. Kapag 10 million to 20 million, yung minimum basic fees is 600,000 plus 5.5%. Kapag naman po nasa 20 million to 30 million yung project cost, ang minimum basic fee is 1,150,000 plus 4.5% of excess of 20 million. Kapag 30 million pataas, ang minimum basic fees is 1,600,000 plus 3.5% of excess of 30 million. Sa later part po, magbibigay po ako ng example kung paano po isolve yung mga minimum basic fees according po sa project cost. For group 2, buildings of 3 stories up to 14 stories, towers, tanks, exhibition buildings, memorials, industrial buildings, simple bridges, low dams, piers, wharves, beams, and silos, and comparable projects. Yung project construction cost naman niya at minimum basic fee ay ito. For 10 million and less, 7% yung makukuha ang minimum basic fees. Kapag 10 million to 20 million, ang minimum basic fees is 200,000 plus 6.5% of excess of 10 million. Kapag 20 million to 30 million, minimum basic fees is 1,350,000 plus 5.5% of excess of 20 million. At kapag 30 million pataas, yung minimum basic fees is 1,900,000 plus 4.5% in excess of 30 million. For group 3, building with 15 or more floors, long span and complex bridges, high dams, major port works, power plants, and other complex structures not covered in Group 1 and 2. Para makuha yung professional fee ng isang project cost, ito lang yung gagawin natin. Kapag yung budget is nasa 10 million pababa, 8% nun yung matatanggap na professional fee. Kapag 10 million to 20 million, 800,000 plus 7.5% in excess of 10 million. Kapag 20 million up to 30 million, yung professional fee is 1,550,000 plus 6.5% in excess of 20 million. Kapag 30 million pataas, ang professional fee is 2,200,000 plus 5.5% in excess of 30 million. If the civil engineer is not the prime professional for the above group, but renders basic civil engineering services only, his fee shall be minimum of 25% of the prime professional fee. Kapag daw yung civil engineer is hindi ang lahat ng gumawa o hindi siya yung nakipag-coordinate sa lahat ng bubuo ng project, yung 25% na minimum basic fee ng prime professional, yun lang yung makukuha niya. For example, 600,000 yung minimum basic fee na nakuha ng prime professional. Yung makukuha ng civil engineer na nag-accommodate lang or nag-renders lang ng basic services is 150. So, pumunta naman tayo sa part B, or the minimum compensation for civil engineer as not prime professional. When a civil engineer renders basic engineering design services, only his fee shall be as follows. For Group 4, hotels, large apartment buildings, office buildings, shopping centers, store building, resorts, hospitals, and comparable projects. Project construction cost and the engineer's fee. For 10 million pababa, yung engineer's fee is 1.05%. Kapag 10 million up to 20 million, yung engineer's fee is 105,000 plus 0.975% in excess of 10 million. Kapag naman nasa 20 million, ang engineer's fee is 202,500 plus 0.825% in excess of 10 million. Kapag naman over 30 million pataas, ang engineer's fee is nasa 285,000 plus 0.675% in excess of 30 million. For B, kapag yung structures ay wala sa nabanggit, pupunta siya, maka-classify siya as Group 3. For the minimum compensation for civil engineers for rendering the following services, kapag value engineering, yung makukuha mong fees is 25% of professional fee plus 25% of savings. Kapag expert witness, 2,000 per appearance naman. So, for the minimum compensation for civil engineer rendering academic services for teaching part-time or full-time basis. So, kapag BS degree holder ka, yung minimum basic fee mo is 75 pesos per hour to 150 pesos per hour. Kapag master degree holder, 150 pesos per hour to 250 pesos per hour. For doctorate degree holder, 250 pesos per hour to 400 pesos per hour. For lecturer, 500 pesos per hour. Conducting tutorial or refresher courses, 500 per hour. Resource speaker, 500 per hour. And for writer or author, 3,000 for article. Para naman sa example kung paano i-calculate yung minimum basic fees. So, for group 1 muna tayo, meron tayong project cost na 25 billion. So, titignan lang natin kung nasa ang range yung 25 million. So, yung gagamitin natin is yung may 1,150,000 plus 4.5% of excess of 20 million. So, sulat natin yung 1.150 million. Tas, yung tira ng 25 na project cost at nung 20 million, kukunin natin yung 4.5% nun. So, for 4.5% ng 5 million, kasi yun na lang yung natira, which is 225,000, i-add natin sa 1,150,000. So, yung magiging result is 1,375,000. So, yun yung magiging minimum basic fee na makukuha ng isang engineer kapag yung project cost niya is 25 million. So, tataas pa yan kasi nasa minimum basic fee pa lang. So, for group number 2, yung project construction cost niya is 4 million, for example. So, titingnan ulit natin kung saang category mag-fall yung 40 million. So, nasa over 30 million tayo. Kaya yung gagamitin nating parang formula para i-calculate yung minimum basic fee is yung 1,900,000 plus 4.5% in excess of 30 million. So, yung gagawin lang natin is i-add natin yung 1,900,000 sa 4.5% ng project cost at yung 20 million, which is 10 million na lang. So, yung 4.5% ng 10 million is 500,000. So, 500,000 plus 1,900,000 is equals to 2,350,000. Pwede rin kayong mag-try mag-compute. So, group number 3 naman, yung project cost natin is nasa 15 million. So, yung magpo-fall tayo sa 800,000 plus 7.5% in excess of 10 million. So, 800,000 plus 7.5% ng natira ng 15 million at 10 million, which is 5 million. Yung 7.5% ng 5 million is 375,000. 375,000 plus 800,000 is equal to 1,175,000. So, yun yung magiging professional fee or minimum basic fee. Para naman sa group 4 na structures, for example, may project cost tayo na 8 million. So, yung gagawin lang natin is i-multiply natin yung 1.05% sa 8 million. Kapag kinuha natin yon, yung magiging result is 84,000. So, yun yung magiging engineer's fee na makukuha ng engineer. So, that's it. Thank you. I hope you learn a lot.